Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today, a two-time guest, is Cali Williams Yost. Grace Under Pressure is the show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the compassion we exert toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as you'll discover that Cali certainly is, it brings out the best in others and hopefully energizes the organization for the greater good. Cali Williams Yost, it is a pleasure to have you on the show a second time.
Oh, John, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to tell people about you. You are the leading authority on high performance work flexibility. You are a visionary, a workplace futurist, and I can attest to that, and I'll tell people in just a moment. You're the founder and CEO of Flex Plus Strategy Group, a solutions company that helps organizations unlock performance and engagement by reimagining how we work, why we work, where we work. She codified these concepts in her couple of books. One was Tweak It. I like that. Tweak It. Make what matters to you happen every day. And her first book, I think, Work Plus Life, Finding the Fit That's Right for You. Welcome, Cali Williams Yost.
I am so happy to be here.
Great. Cali, the last time you were on my show, which was actually the first time, you said something which I have actually stolen from you.
I am so glad.
We talked about the transition, moving to the future of work and moving to a hybrid. And you said, John, this has been going on for a while. COVID merely accelerated it. Did I get that right, Cali?
Yes, you did. You did. Flexibility is not new. Not new.
Okay, great. And you've got some interest. We were talking beforehand. You've got some interesting stories about embracing grace where we are, but also moving forward in exciting new ways. But I brought you on here to get inside the Great Resignation. What's happening and why, Cali?
Well, if you read all the research and you talk to leaders and organizations, this is a complex issue. I think for the most part, why this is happening is the pandemic was a moment of really intense reflection for people. And I think what was maybe tolerable pre-pandemic, maybe people just weren't making a change because they just weren't motivated. All of a sudden they had time to really reflect and say, this isn't working for me. In some cases, it was that they were working very differently than they did before. And they just realized either I'm going to keep working in a different way or I'm going to go find something else. And there are a lot of employers out there that are using the promise of flexibility, the promise of remote work in order to attract that talent, because they know now the value proposition for people has changed. Flexibility is just as important as compensation. In fact, I would say it's a three-legged stool: flexibility, compensation, and opportunity. And if you're offering it, people want it and they will leave to find it. And if you're an employer who has not engaged your workforce in some sort of conversation, or even better yet, process of reimagining work, you really run the risk of people assuming they won't be able to work differently going forward. So they'll seek it elsewhere. There's a nuance to this, a little bit of a twist that we don't talk about enough. And this is why I really hope we move towards thinking about high performance flexibility and not so much about remote work, because we're leaving a whole segment of workers out of the conversation, which are the people who can't necessarily remote work, but the flexibility they had was not optimal and it was too much flexibility. So high performance flexibility is flexibility that allows somebody to be their best on and off the job. And workers like retail workers and restaurant workers, let's say, sometimes they were given too much schedule flexibility that was not consistent. And so many of them may be leaving for jobs that give them more consistency in their scheduling. So again, it's about the job and how, when, and where it's done best.
Right. Was that because the scheduling was arbitrary, or the employees asked for this arbitrariness?
So this is interesting, John. So this is where we get into technology. Okay. So there are programs, scheduling programs, that can read the flow of customers and the flow of the business, and will shoot out reports on a sort of a, as needed sort of on demand basis that really will determine how many people are on site and how many people are not coming in. And theoretically, that makes sense in terms of, oh, we get to run our margins as sort of, tightly as we can. But the
Sure.
problem with that
Absolutely.
is if you had kids or, it just was too difficult to manage your life to that schedule. And, another example I've seen in call centers, some call centers will make newer employees take the night shift, let's say. And, if you're a parent, that can be very difficult. And so it's about being flexible with how you just manage your labor so that it aligns more with how people are actually able to perform for you. So people who had to deal with that, I think in this great resignation said, I'm going to go find something that is more
You
manageable
know,
for me.
there's an element, I think. Thank you for that. There's an element that isn't talked about a lot, and I'm going to say we are evolving into a bifurcated workplace. What do I mean by that? People who have the flexibility by career choice to work either remotely or hybrid. However, and it's what you just talked about, retail or healthcare. A surgeon friend of mine said, "I can't do operations from my home."
Mhm.
So I have to be there. So, what kinds are companies paying attention to this kind of tension? And what do you hear, Callie?
Well, remember the companies that we work with, they're trying to look at this from a much more strategic,
Mhm.
intentional perspective. And we always say to them, you must begin with what do you need to get done? What do you need to do? And so when you start from that perspective and you make it about a process that then allows different parts of the business and different jobs to then determine how, when, and where that job is done best, there's a consistency in the process, but then how that ultimately is executed can be flexible in terms of place and space and time and pay and pace. And so I'll use your example about healthcare providers. So pre-pandemic, I worked with a hospital and it was always like, oh, the doctors, they can't be remote, like they can't do things. Well, you know what? Telemedicine has really shown there are aspects of a doctor's job that perhaps could be done remotely. And
Mhm.
I've actually had the same hospital tell me, it's funny, there are certain aspects of client follow-up care that actually patients prefer because if they're on Zoom and the doctor's just asking them questions, their family members can jump on and it's nobody's traveling. And so, again, it's about saying what aspects of the job can be done in a flexible, creative way. The same thing with nurses. There is a lot of flexibility within how you can schedule nursing shifts and nursing. So again, it's about seeing this holistically
Mhm.
around the type of work and job that is done, and then allowing that flexibility to be determined from that place.
That's great. I like how you have an interesting perspective on it. My small-minded perspective is you're either remote or you're hybrid
Ugh.
or you're working full time. But I like the way you break a job which is perceived as on premise into components which it's not fully that way. Did I understand you correctly?
Correct,
So
and I'll give you another example. So always I get, well, administrative assistants can't work remotely. Always. Oh, that was the big one. Well, I had a wonderful client that she said to me, if administrative assistants cannot have some flexibility, we're not doing this. So we got the administrative assistants from this 300 person department into a room. And we said, how are you going to make this happen? And they were really creative and they determined that they could work remotely periodically as long as there was coverage on site that they arranged with each other so that
mhm.
the tasks that they had to handle when they were in person could be handled by somebody, but they were able to do a lot of their job from a remote location. Same thing in terms of time and schedule. They arranged a Venn diagram of coverage from like 6 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night when a lot of the professionals in that office would be present, but there was no increase in overtime because they just worked within their set schedule, but there was more coverage. So again, it's about being creative about the job and saying what is possible. and then moving from that perspective.
Thank you. We were chatting earlier, and you talked about the pandemic when it first locked down March 2020. We had to make these changes, and now we've devolved into a different system. But now you said something about there's the want, my words, the want to, and explain that. So we're discovering our new normal, but you had some interesting perspective on that, Cali.
So I was asked this week, I was to present to the global offices and affiliates of one of our clients. And the question they asked me was, how are organizations handling change right now? So to answer the question, I broke the change into two phases. So the first phase happened when the pandemic hit, to your point. We just had to do it. You just had to find a new way to operate. And in some ways, that was easier than what we're facing right now, which is the next phase is going to be one you have to choose. You can either choose to move forward, and I'm calling it fight, flight, or freeze, right? I'm seeing organizations take one of those steps, and maybe there's a little bit of all of it, but for the most part, taking a stance that lands in either those three categories. So you can fight, meaning you move toward the next level of change, which is taking the lessons you've learned from this past 2-year experiment, adding back the things about the way you worked before that still do matter, okay? And creating a new thing that you are going to begin to explore and experiment with, an evolution into a new flexible way of operating. There are plenty of organizations, however, who are facing this choice and they're freezing. They're doing almost nothing. They're kind of just like not even taking any kind of stance and just hoping.
Okay. So it sounds logical to me. So why would an organization, as you say, freeze?
Because they don't know what to do. It's like, how do we do this? How do we now move forward? And the traditional ways of handling flexibility are not working. So traditionally it was, let's write a policy where we say to everybody, you're on site 2 days a week. And it's like, and you wonder why people are like, why? Okay, well, because, and then it just doesn't work because there's no logic behind it to people.
Well, I know the easy answer, Callie, and that's hire you and your firm. So but because you are a soothsayer or a futurist, because you told me I know the future and I can tell you. So I put you on the spot now. Tell us about the future. We were kidding around on that. Why did you say that you know the future? Because you have seen it. What did you mean by that, Callie?
Well, before we go to that, I just want to say the third thing people are doing is the flight back. Okay. Trying to fly on back to the past with these sort of that is definitely not going to work. Okay. So it's even better to just freeze and then decide you're going to move forward, then try to go back. Anyway, but how do I know the future? Why do I get so excited about this? And why can I say with all confidence that if you move toward this change and you partner with all levels of the organization partner in terms of trying to redefine how and where work can be done based upon what we've learned and shown each other and what we still think is important from the past, is I've seen it. I've done it. I did it before the pandemic. I have watched what happens when everybody comes together and steps back and says, okay, so what do we need to do? And I'm not just talking about the tasks and priorities of your job. I'm talking about from your purpose. Like I have one client whose purpose is everyone thrives, right? Okay, so if everybody's supposed to thrive, how and where do we do that best? And then gets down to, what are your strategic priorities? Well, our strategic priorities are to grow in these different areas or to serve these different, great. So how and where do we do that best? And, then we get down to the tasks and priorities of the job. And when you do that, the level of innovation, engagement, well-being, creativity, like all of it, people really do step to the plate, but they have to be invited into the reimagining. And that's the next step. And if you want to think about the Great Resignation, I'm telling you, you can flip it over into sort of this great reimagining if you invite your people in. But people have to be trained to do this. It's not something you just like automatically know how to do. There has to be some support that is provided where people understand how to come together and think about their jobs and begin to creatively imagine how they can be delivered on site, remotely, through technology, at different times, at different paces. So one of my clients is a university, and I was waiting for somebody to say this to me because I didn't want to bring it up. And this one leader looks at me and she goes, what if we let people work differently in the summer? And I was like, oh my gosh, because she's like, it's dead here, right? I mean, we could just have people be more on site during the school year, but then in the summer, maybe there's more remote work. Maybe we make it something that's flexibly recalibrates. I'm like, bingo, brilliant. Okay. But you have to be creative about that. That's a big departure for them.
I love that. I love your term. You kind of threw it away, but the great reawakening. Is that what the term you said?
Reimagining.
Yes. Reimagining. I like that.
Just think about how we can do this differently.
Great reimagining. So, okay, I'm getting excited, Cali, about what you're saying, and I want to reimagine. What's my first step? Where does it begin?
Well, this is where, John,
other than hiring you and your firm.
I wish I could tell you that this was something you could just, send out a communication to everybody and it's good. It really is a system of change that requires effort and time and commitment. It does. However, it depends on the level that you're at. So let's say you're at the senior leader level, which in my opinion is where this all needs to begin. You've got to have all the senior leadership team get together, and I'm talking business line leaders and functional leadership get together and answer 5 simple questions, which is, what is high performance flexibility? What is it? Why does it matter to our organization? You have to have the broad business case, because right now I'm feeling like a lot of organizations are kind of feeling a little bit forced into this, which doesn't make anybody feel good. So remind yourself, you've been able to stay in business for the last 2 years because of flexibility. So there's operational resilience. You've been able to perhaps get people to be more productive and adopt technology in ways that they haven't. Like, there's all sorts of operational and performance benefits to a flexible operating model. And then there's, of course, the talent. That's I'm going to tell you right now, it's table stakes. Okay, you don't offer people flexibility that makes sense to them for their jobs. It's going to be very difficult to get good people to work.
I'm glad you said that, because at least it was a year ago, and but some very senior executives, the household names in business, would say, "Wow, we're bringing all of our people back in the office." And I kind of found it. To me, it reminded me of kind of a king who wants to see bodies around. Why? Simply because they were feeling that if I don't have the bodies around, I don't feel important. That was my little snide take on it, whether it's true, but I think they've retracted that. Have they not? So,
again, this is where I've talked about the sort of fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like, that to me is a try to fly back, because that's what you know. And it's this process of getting all your leadership around the table. And that person needs to humbly come to the table and say, listen, humbly, I prefer everybody here. Okay, that's just me. That's how I've done it. But I get it that this is not the reality we're in. So how do we do this differently? So get that business case defined, and then ask yourself, what does this look like when we're working in a flexible, dynamic way at the enterprise level, at the department level, and even at the team level? And that's when you start to customize it to different types of jobs. Then you have to ask yourself, how do we get there? Like, what's the process of execution? And then as a leadership team, how do we have to support that? So I would say, for that example, you cannot be out there saying those words. It does not, you do not get to say those words. You may think that inside, but no more announcements like that, right? And so that's where you really begin at the leadership team. If you're a manager and your leadership is not doing that, you still have power to look at your team and say, look, what do we need to do? Let's look at the priorities and tasks we need to accomplish. And I invite you in to this reimagining process with me. And let's think about how and where we do it best. And then let's pilot. Let's keep testing. Let's start on this date. We're going to go forward with this new way of working. And then 3 months, 6 months from now, we're going to step back, see what works, what didn't, and continue to evolve it. Because here's the thing, with high performance flexibility, you are never done. And one of the things that I keep hearing now is, we're not getting it right. We won't get it right away. And I'm like, you're never going to get it right. like if that's your goal, to get it right, you will be disappointed, because you'll be learning and changing. And that's how you want to approach it.
I like what you're doing, because you're giving companies, I mean, it's individualized, and I'm going to say the term a roadmap, or at least a process.
Yes, it is. We have a roadmap. I've spent 20 plus years, John, developing the roadmap. And I'm going to tell you, that's why I get excited, because it's like, just follow this. This is what will help you evolve.
Okay, now I'm going to throw a spanner in that
All right.
roadmap. So, the other part of the word we hear almost as much as the Great Resignation is the word weariness.
Oh,
I am tired of
yeah.
this. I want to get back to normal.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean I want to be 9 to 5 in my office. They're not saying that, but we're tired, we're beat
Yeah.
up. So there's exhaustion, all of these things. So there's the human dynamic. And you and I were talking about this, and the topic of grace came up. I don't know how it did, but it did. And you said, you had a wonderful thing from an employee's perspective toward management. And what did you say about that, Callie?
So I think part of this is, John, we need to give each other grace in terms of managers, yes, need to give their employees grace because this has been very difficult for a lot of people. And your people have performed. I mean, if you look at the performance metrics for organizations over the last 2 years, you know this, the stock market, you know, earnings, all the metrics have shown organizations have done, people have delivered, okay? But they've delivered in a very difficult period of time for many. And
Mhm.
so to give people the grace that if you start talking about coming back to the office or you start engaging them in this conversation, you want to give them grace to still be a little baby deer legs about it, right? Like, I
Mhm.
don't know, right? But we also, as individuals, need to give our managers grace because they don't necessarily have all the answers either. We can't look at them to say, tell us what to do. Okay. They're going to only be able to say, I want to engage in this reimagining process with you. And if they're fumbling around and if sometimes they don't do it all the right, don't jump on them and be like, I'm out, I quit. You know, it's like we have to give each other the grace in this.
Great. And we were talking about, I told you just the other last week, I gave a keynote and I echoed back to a book I had written 12 years ago and didn't really talk about a lot in public. And it was the theory of purpose, lead with purpose. And I think, and you had talked about that's what really is anchoring people. They're looking for that. Am I correct in that, Callie?
So they're looking for purpose in terms of what, like why, right? Like, why does it matter? Why? And I think organizations are struggling because I think there is a lot that matters in terms of possibly being together in person again. So I have
Mhm.
one client, it's a university, so big university system, and the different units and schools are handling it in unique ways, right? And one I thought did a brilliant job of saying, we need to bring people back on campus, obviously, because they're kids on campus. And in order to get everybody to understand that they're, they matter, because they showed all the professors, they came in and they presented their research that they're doing. And they linked back everybody's job, whatever it was, to supporting not only the education of the next generation of the workforce and young people, but also supporting the amazing research that all of these professors are undertaking and how important it is the community have some degree of in-person support for that. And I thought that was brilliant. Okay, because you reminded people, what are we doing here? Like, what is this all
Yeah,
about? Okay, instead of just
right.
saying we need you back here 2 days a week. Okay, why?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It was just that simple, and it made a huge difference.
Right. And I've worked with organizations, particularly in the technology sector, where they some can work fully remote or strategically, like come together for a sprint or
Right.
something like that. So it's planned out and doing that. But there's also that sort of among workers that's going through this crisis we've been through for 2 years. It provokes thinking about, is this all there is,
Yep.
or what else is there for me? So people are making career changes too that they must do, and no organization can hold them back. And I don't say that negatively to
Mhm.
throwing
No,
stones
that's
at
absolutely
organizations,
true.
but
That's,
they
and it
want
goes
to
back to
do
that
something different.
reflection.
I'm sorry.
It goes back to that reflection that people did. Life is short. If there's something they really want to do,
No.
absolutely, they're going to do that. I just think it's the people who basically like their jobs. But I think for a lot of people, parts of their life became very important to them.
Right.
And that, you know, to the reflection point of This matters to me. And I was just saying this the other day. I live near our elementary school, and my kids are way out of elementary school. But I drive by this elementary school sometimes at drop off, and guess who are the large majority of the parents dropping off their kids every day?
I'm going to guess
The
dads.
dads. The
Yeah,
dads. And that was not the case when my
sure.
kids were little. And I thought to myself, you know what? This is just what, 15 minutes in the morning? But I'm going to tell you right now, these guys are not giving this up 100%. They're not. It means too much to them. They wouldn't be doing it this long into the pandemic, 2 years later. So you have to think to yourself, if you're a guy, he's got kids, you've been walking them to school for 2 years, and your employer says you've got to come back 5 days a week into the office, and you know you really don't, you're going to go someplace else. It's just that is too important to you.
And that's important because we're talking. I mean, I had proffered the idea of doing something completely different, but so much of it is, and I think to get back to your book title, tweak, it's, make some adjustments, isn't it? And listen to what people want. Do you counsel your clients to do that,
So
Callie?
people ask me why I wrote books about managing your work-life fit as a flexible work strategist. That's because many, many years ago, I realized that an organization can support and give flexibility, but you as an individual need the skills and tools to capture that flexibility and use it in an intentional way to manage how your work and life fit together based upon what matters to you, right? And everybody's different. I always like to say, I've never heard the same work-life fit twice. It's like snowflakes. We're all so different. It's fascinating to me. But small shifts, small tweaks in the way you work and manage your life make a huge difference. So that 15 minutes for that dad walking their child to school, that's just small, but it means so, so much. And so that's the power of being intentional about what matters and how, when, and where you do that best. And your employer needs to partner with you and support that flexibility and that decision making, but you need the skills to do it. And people aren't trained to be intentional about their work-life fit. So that's one of the pieces of the execution puzzle.
Great. I love how you operate at the macro level, and we talked about this remote work or virtual work or a whole different kind of thing. But it really comes down to the human equation. Just like a dad who takes his young children to school, that's, as you said, 15 minutes, whatever it is. That's not an all or nothing. Well,
No.
it becomes an all or nothing proposition for that individual, but
Yes.
it's a small ask in the grand scheme of things for an employer to accommodate. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
So,
I had one leader tell me, we went through a transformation of his organization, and he lives in Brooklyn, and he
mhm.
likes to ride his bike to the office in Manhattan. And he talked about
That's a
how,
brave person.
yeah, exactly. I know. So, but he talked about how he loved the fact that if it was a beautiful day, he could take the longer route to work on his bike along the river.
Mhm.
And it was literally 15 minutes longer. But he said, on those days, I so appreciate the ability to do that. Whereas before, they used to have to clock in. I mean, it was crazy. And this was not that long ago. This is
Yeah.
before the pandemic. But it was just that 15 minutes, the freedom to be able to take that 15 minutes that meant so, so much to him. So again, I think we don't realize how little it takes. A little bit of control and a little bit of intentionality that you give somebody makes all the difference in the world in terms of how they feel about the organization, but also about their own well-being.
Or, as I might say, give one another a little bit of
A little bit of
grace, as
grace.
you said. So,
Exactly.
unfortunately, Callie, we are racing along here, and so your time is valuable. And I ask every guest a question about grace. So, do you have a story for us?
I do have a great one that just happened last week where a client and I gave each other grace. So it was the first in-person meeting we have had together. We've worked virtually for over a year with each
Mhm.
other. We finally met in person last week, and we fumbled around with the technology and the hybrid. It was hysterical. Nobody knew how to hook it up, and we didn't know exactly how to share documents. It was just the kookiest thing. Anyway, but we laughed. And we all just felt at the end of it, we just felt like, you know what? This works. It's fine. That's what we all have to keep doing is no, it's just going to be weird. This is going to be a little awkward and weird as we figure all this out, and just let's be patient with each other.
And hey, it makes life interesting. And,
Yeah.
so often grace is just the simple things. So, Cali, how can people find you? So,
John, let's see. You can go to our website, which is the flexstrategygroup.com, or just flexstrategygroup.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I tend to be on there about every day commenting on something, an article or something that I see that I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
I see you on there. So,
yes, yes. And, always feel free to reach out, Cali at Flex Strategy Group. Always happy to connect.
Right. Cali, it's a joy to have you on the show a second time. And with that, we're going to close out. So.